The void had no mercy left. Bodies drifted in shattered armor, helmets cracked open like glass eggs, leaking frozen vapor into the silence. Hull fragments spun lazily through the darkness, pieces of ships that no longer had names, no longer mattered. Beneath them, the gravity well of a dying moon tugged everything toward its broken crust, a mass grave waiting to claim what war had left behind. The black ship hung above it all, scarred but still breathing, its ancient plating pulsing faintly with power drawn from somewhere deeper than its engines. Scorch marks ran along its hull where plasma fire had licked at the edges, and fresh gouges from boarding claws still bled atmosphere into space. Its weapon sat cold, not by choice, but by necessity. Reserves were low. Too low. The last battle hadn't ended. It had just gone silent, both sides caught in the same brutal checkmate. Out there, beyond the debris field, the Zelkon cruiser lingered like a shadow held together by spite and half-functioning systems. Its spines flickered with broken light, energy signatures unstable, but still enough to kill if provoked. Between the two ships stretched a corridor of wreckage, a no-man's land where drones scavenged for salvage, and bodies hung like warnings. On the black ship's bridge, the silence wasn't much different. Scanners ran on passive, avoiding any pulse that might trigger a response. Oxygen rationing had reduced the atmosphere to just enough for breathing and nothing else. Every breath felt borrowed. Every second stretched toward collapse. The crew knew what was coming. There would be no reinforcements. No rescue. The Zelkon ship was crippled, but it wasn't dead, and neither was the corruption lurking inside its fractured hull, a presence that had turned loyal soldiers into something less than flesh, more than machine. The next clash wouldn't be a battle. It would be a reckoning. Somewhere deep in the ship, the ancient systems whispered warnings in a language no one fully understood, a language older than the war itself. Pressure shifts. Power surges. Something moving where nothing should move. The void didn't just kill here. It hung the survivors for the stars to see. The bridge lights dimmed further, not out of choice, but because power had to be pulled into the spinal rail cannon, their last functional heavy weapon. Its coils hummed quietly in standby, waiting for orders no one wanted to give. Across the command deck, Rhaegar stood with his back to the flickering tactical display, eyes locked on the shattered viewport. A fractured pane of reinforced cerasteel separated him from the void beyond, its cracks spiderwebbed from the last kinetic impact. It should have shattered completely. It hadn't. The black ship was still too stubborn to die. Rhaegar's fingers rested on the console edge, knuckles pale, joints stiff. He had fought in void battles since his conscription at 16, first as a gunner's mate, then tactical lead, and finally standing here wearing a rank he never wanted, under a commander no one ever questioned. Every scar across his arms told a story of a battle barely survived. He hadn't earned his place by skill alone. Survival, in this war, was its own brutal form of merit. Behind him, the holomap jittered as the black ship's sensors flickered, losing their grip on the wreckage field. The distortion wasn't just debris interference, something was bleeding into their systems again, some alien signal nested so deep in the void that it scraped against the limits of what their sensors could comprehend. Dr. Lysera was already on it, fingers dancing across the diagnostic slab at her station. Lysera wasn't military. Not in the traditional sense. Her path to this war started in a research lab buried under Titan's methane ice sheets, a facility dedicated to understanding alien relics recovered from long-forgotten battlefields. Her work was theoretical until the Zelkon arrived. When the First Fleets darkened Earth's sky, theory had no value anymore. She adapted. She learned to fight with science, bending technology until it screamed and broke into something new, something lethal. The black ship itself was her obsession now. A vessel no one built, no one understood, and yet here it was, obeying commands written in languages the human mind could barely process. Every hour spent alive aboard this ship was another piece of data, another unraveling mystery. Lysera's motivation wasn't survival, it was knowledge. If they lived, fine. If they died, but she found the truth about the black ship's origin, that was fine too. The ship's comm crackled once, static bleeding into the bridge for a half-second before a voice cut through, not fully human, not fully machine. Saran 4's vocalizer was damaged in the last boarding action, and every word they spoke carried distortion like grinding metal through broken glass. Outer ring sealed. I left them outside. They didn't scream this time. Saran 4's helmet gleamed under emergency lights as they stepped into the bridge, their cybernetic frame casting an unnaturally elongated shadow across the floor. Saran wasn't technically crew. They weren't technically anything anymore, a relic from the first human-Zelkon war, a soldier who had taken so many neural implants and synthetic grafts that no one could confidently say where flesh ended and metal began. What motivated Saran was harder to explain. There were no records of who they had been before the implants, no name recovered from the burned personnel files. Some said they had volunteered for the enhancements to avenge a lost world. Others claimed they were a deserter, captured and repurposed into a living weapon. Saran never confirmed or denied any of it. They just fought and fought well enough that no one asked further. Outside the ship, the Zelkon wreck drifted slightly closer, its jagged silhouette blotting out starlight in irregular pulses. The alien vessel wasn't fully dead, life signatures flickered weakly, too irregular for living crew, too chaotic for automated systems. Something else had taken root inside, something the humans only knew as the corruption. It wasn't Zelkon technology, not originally. The corruption was older, found embedded inside a derelict alien ship generations ago, when the Dominion was still expanding. It rewrote metal, flesh, and code without distinction, a viral intelligence that didn't care what you were before it found you. When the Zelkon tried to weaponize it, they lost control. Now, it moved from ship to ship, battlefield to battlefield, rewriting everything it touched. Vadran's boots clanged as he entered, the weight of his armored frame announcing him before his voice did. The commander wore his rank like a weapon, not with pride, but with the heavy clarity of someone who knew leadership was just another sentence. He had served long enough to understand that no one survived command. Eventually, every officer either died in battle or found their orders choking on the bones of their own morality. Vadran had no illusions left. His first war was fought planet-side, back when humanity still believed in ground invasions and tactical victories. That war ended when orbital bombardments erased the need for infantry, and Vadran traded dirt beneath his boots for steel decks under his feet. Every campaign since had stripped him further down, until only function remained. His motivation was simple: if humanity was going to lose this war, he would make sure the enemy paid for every inch. He stepped toward the viewport, arms crossed, gaze locked on the wreck outside. It's moving again. Lysera glanced up from her terminal, eyes rimmed with the exhaustion of too many sleepless rotations. It's not propulsion. It's being pulled. By what? She tapped the display, enlarging the field between the ships. In the hollow darkness, threads of barely visible energy stretched between the Zelkon cruiser and something beneath the wreckage, something buried in the moon's crust. Ancient technology, older than both human and Zelkon records, flickered to life under Lysera's scans. This isn't just salvage, she said softly. It's a Gallows. Rhaegar frowned. Explain. Lysera's fingers twitched over the controls, pulling up layered scans, biological, mechanical, something in between. This isn't just wreckage. It's deliberate. Something down there drags dead ships into orbit, uses them to build a kind of machine. Not for power. For display. It's warning anyone who comes here. Vadran's jaw clenched. Warning who? Lysera didn't answer immediately. Instead, she pulled up archival data recovered from the TheBlackShip's ancient core languages, so old they had to be processed through 3 different translation matrices just to form coherent phrases. The text was simple, brutal, and absolute. Let all who enter know this void remembers. The dead are displayed. The living are claimed. Saran 4 stepped closer to the display, their fingers tracing the alien script as if it triggered some half-forgotten memory buried deep in their implants. Their voice crackled again. This isn't a battlefield. It's a feeding ground. For a moment, no one spoke. The bridge systems hummed softly, the only sound besides the faint creak of stressed bulkheads. The black ship itself seemed to shift, systems flickering as if responding to the ancient words. Vadran turned to Rhaegar. Prep all remaining drones. We need to know what's beneath that crust. Rhaegar hesitated. Commander, if this is what I think it is, sending drones will just wake it up faster. Vadran's smile was humorless. It's awake already. We're just deciding if we die blind or with our eyes open. Lysera's hands shook slightly as she keyed in the drone launch. Her motivation's knowledge at any cost tasted bitter now. Some knowledge wasn't meant to be earned. Some truths couldn't be endured. But it was too late for hesitation. The black ship was here, and the void had already seen them. The first drone slipped through the airlock, engines burning faintly against the silence. It spiraled downward toward the moon, sensors pulsing as it descended through drifting debris. For a moment, all readings were normal. Then the drone's feed went dark, not destroyed, just cut off. In its final transmitted frame, something vast shifted beneath the surface. Not a structure. Not a ship. Something bound in place by the wreckage above it, limbs of stone and metal reaching skyward. A creature? A machine? The void didn't care for definitions. The gallows had been waiting for something new to hang. Rhaegar exhaled softly. What do we do now? Vadran's reply was cold and clear. We hang back or we cut the rope. The black ship's engines flared, driving it closer to the wreck toward the noose tightening around them all. The ship's engine settled into a low idle hum, the vibration passing through the deck plates in uneven pulses. Power routed unevenly across failing conduits, flickering between sections like veins struggling to circulate blood in a dying body. Rhaegar ran diagnostics without speaking, his fingers moving faster than his mind could fully process muscle memory built from years of patchwork survival. He already knew the numbers would be worse than the system admitted. The black ship lied to them constantly. To protect the crew. To hide the truth. Or maybe, because it didn't know any other way. Sarenfa stood motionless near the bulkhead, helmet tilted slightly as if listening to something no one else could hear. Their implants twitched faintly, subdermal processes syncing and desyncing with the ship's alien systems. Every time the black ship pulsed with those irregular power shifts, Saren flinched, a glitch running through muscle, memory, or something deeper. Vadran noticed, but said nothing. The commander had learned to leave Saren's internal struggles alone. Some battles couldn't be led from the front. Lysera moved to the rear data console, adjusting the spectral filters on the drone feed. Static covered most of the signal now, but something flickered behind the noise, geometric patterns etched into the moon's surface beneath the wreck. They weren't natural formations. They were language. Not Zelkoran. Not human. Something older, more deliberate. A warning or an invitation. Before she could isolate the pattern, a low sound reverberated through the hull. Not an external impact, this was internal. A vibration born somewhere deep inside the black ship itself. A low-frequency pulse, like breath catching in a throat that shouldn't exist. Rhaegar's hands froze on the console. That's not structural strain. Lysera shook her head. No. That's communication. Vadran turned sharply. From the wreck? No, Lysera said quietly. From inside us. For a moment, no one moved. Then a secondary voice cut through the internal comms, soft but unmistakably present. A human voice, one no one should have heard again. Auxiliary control to bridge. You need to see this. It was Drell Varric's voice, the black ship's quartermaster, or what remained of him. Varric had been stationed in auxiliary control 3 days earlier, tasked with inventorying remaining munitions after the last boarding action. No one had heard from him since. His biometric tag still registered him as alive, but barely his vitals, so erratic the system often flagged him as deceased before correcting itself. Saran spoke first, stepping toward the internal comm panel. Varric. Confirm your location. The reply came through ragged, the sound of someone speaking past shredded vocal cords. Still here. Deck 7. Auxiliary control. I think I found the Black Ship's memory. Lysera's eyes narrowed. That's impossible. The ship's memory core was destroyed centuries before we even found it. Varric coughed a wet, broken sound. Then explain this. The comm feed flickered, switching to a video signal from Varric's helmet cam. The auxiliary control room was dark, emergency lighting casting long, distorted shadows. Across the far wall, something had grown organic and metallic at once, threaded into the bulkhead like roots searching for purchase. The structure pulsed faintly, each pulse synchronized with the vibrations the bridge had just felt. In the center of this growth, Varric's hands held something half-formed, a crystalline shard, smooth and reflective, but constantly changing. It reshaped itself with every breath Varric took, adapting to his touch, his pulse, his thoughts. It wasn't just a piece of the ship. It was recording him. Every time I think about home, Varric said hoarsely, it shows me Earth. Not how it was. How it could have been if we won. Vadran's jaw tightened. Put it down. Varric shook his head slowly. It won't let me. It's showing me things I couldn't have known. Things none of us knew. Lysera stepped closer to the display. What does it show you? Varric's breathing slowed, his eyes unfocused as the shard flickered through scenes: Earth skies dark with Zelkoran ships, cities burning, human ships retreating. Then, images shifted not to reality, but to alternate paths. Earth surrounded by a planetary shield, human fleets overwhelming alien invaders with technology no one ever invented, cities untouched by war. It's rewriting history, Lysera whispered. Not just showing him data. It's simulating alternate futures. Possible timelines. Rhaegar frowned. Why? What's the point of showing us what could have been? Saran 4's voice crackled softly. Because the Black Ship doesn't know what it is anymore. They all turned toward the cyborg. Saran's fingers twitched as they touched the bulkhead, skin, and metal connecting directly with the ship's surface. This vessel has been repurposed so many times by its creators, by the Zelkoran, by us it doesn't remember its original mission. It's trying to rebuild its identity from us. From our memories. Our regrets. Varric's voice softened. It wants us to choose. Lysera stepped back, her pulse racing. Choose what? Varric smiled faintly, though there was no humor in it. What kind of ship it wants to be. Before anyone could respond, a sudden shift rippled through the deck. Emergency klaxon screamed. The Black Ship's external sensors went fully blind, every feed cutting to static. Something was blocking them, not a weapon, but a presence. Something larger than the wreck outside. Vadran grabbed the comm. All hands, combat stations. Full lockdown. We're not alone. In auxiliary control, the walls trembled as the organic metallic growth expanded, spreading tendrils across the floor, toward Varric's boots. He didn't move. The shard in his hands burned brighter, flooding the room with fractured light. Lysera's voice cut through the bridge silence. If it's rebuilding itself using us, what happens if it decides we're not worth copying? Saran's helmet tilted slightly, the faintest trace of a grim smile hidden beneath metal. Then it finds something better. On the external sensors, a faint signal broke through the static, a ghost transmission from the wreck outside. A single word, repeated in ancient script, translated by the Black Ship's struggling systems. Replacement. Vadran's fingers curled into a fist. We're not letting this ship decide we're obsolete. Lysera's hands moved fast, interfacing with the ship's core controls, bypassing automated systems, forcing direct human input into navigation, power, and weapons. If it's learning from us, let's teach it something. Rhaegar grinned sharply. How to survive? The black ship's engines roared back to life, raw power bleeding through failing conduits. The ancient systems protested, but the crew's sheer will forced compliance. They pushed the ship toward the wreck, toward the moon, toward the unknown machine beneath the surface. Varric's voice flickered back onto comms. You have to see the final memory before you go. Lysera hesitated. What memory? Varric's feed shifted one last time, showing not the past, not the future, but a fragment from the black ship's birth. The vessel wasn't human. Wasn't Zelkoran. It was built by something else entirely, a species long since consumed by the corruption. The ship's original purpose was never war. It was meant to be a prison. For something that could rewrite reality itself. Vadran's breath slowed. We've been flying a cage this whole time. Saren's voice softened. And now the prisoner is learning. The black ship's hull groaned as ancient seals broke, systems unlocking files no one was meant to read. The crew had one chance: guide the ship toward survival, or let it decide its own future without them. Lysera's voice shook. What if it doesn't choose us? Vadran's reply was steel. Then we make it regret that choice. Outside, the void stirred something older than war itself, reaching toward the ship with unseen hands. The Gallows had found new bodies to hang, but the crew of the black ship wasn't done fighting yet. Not by a long shot. The comm stayed open, Varric's breathing filling the silence between flickering words and corrupted video feeds. Lysera forced her eyes away from the screen, fingers curling tight around the edge of her console as if gripping something solid could anchor her. Vadran stood like a statue, jaw clenched, eyes fixed on nothing. His voice cut through the hum of failing systems. Varric, listen to me. Whatever that thing is, whatever it's showing you, it's not real. It's feeding off you. Drop the shard. Move away from the growth. A pause. Static crackled. Then Varric's whisper came through, what if I can't? The sound of him fighting for breath followed, a wet, choking rasp. Lysera closed her eyes, not wanting to picture what his lungs must look like after breathing auxiliary controls recycled air, saturated with spores from that alien growth. Saren IV's modulated voice filled the space left by silence. If he's bonded with the memory shard, separation could kill him. Vadran didn't flinch. Then we find a way to take the shard from him without ripping his mind apart. Rhaegar snorted softly, a sound with no humor. Any chance that's the easy option? Lysera's hands moved fast, pulling up every scan they had of the auxiliary section, overlaying old schematics with real-time data from Varric's helmet feed. Her voice stayed level, but a tremor ran just under the surface. There's no easy option. That thing, whatever's growing into the bulkhead, it's tied into the primary neural relay. Varric's not just holding a piece of memory. He is memory now. Vadran turned toward her, face shadowed beneath the flickering lights. Explain. She didn't want to. But the truth had a weight that couldn't be dodged. The black ship's memory core wasn't just storage. It was biological, partially alive. When we found this wreck, we assumed the memory core had decayed into inert matter. Her hand hovered over the screen. We were wrong. It wasn't dead. It was dormant. Saren IV spoke again, voice lower. And Varric woke it up. Rhaegar paced the bridge, tension building in every footstep. So what do we do? Cut him loose? Blow that whole section and purge it before it spreads? Lysera's stomach clenched. If we purge it, we lose all records of what this ship was before us. We lose the chance to know what we're really sitting inside. Vadran's eyes narrowed. And if we don't? Saren's voice turned cold. It won't stop at Varric. Varric coughed again, a sound like tearing cloth. I'm still here, you know. Lysera leaned toward the comm. We know, Varric. We're coming. He gave a short, brittle laugh. I don't think you want to. Every time I blink, I see the ship looking back at me. Not the ship we know. The one before it had a crew. The one that was alive. It remembers dying. And it remembers why. You really want to meet something that's been waiting centuries to explain itself? Vadran's voice was iron. We don't leave our own behind. Varric's breath caught again, sharp this time. That's the problem, Commander. I'm not sure I'm your own anymore. Lysera's hands trembled as they activated the lockdown overrides, sealing bulkheads between auxiliary and the rest of the ship. Not to trap Varric, but to buy time. Time no one really had. Then we go in, Vadran said, voice flat. Rhaegar shook his head, frustrated. Going in blind, into a section fused with alien biomass and ancient tech? That's not a rescue, it's a suicide run. Vadran didn't argue. We've had worse odds. Saren stepped forward, weapon systems activating with a soft hum, plating shifting along one arm as blades deployed from beneath the wrist. I'll go first. My implants can sync with the ship's corrupted systems faster than yours. Lysera turned sharply. That's not sync. That's infection. Saren's helmet tilted slightly. Difference is perspective. Vadran moved to the weapons locker, grabbing his rifle with the same practiced ease as breathing. This isn't a debate. We go together. We pull him out. The others armed themselves in silence, tension sitting between them like a loaded gun. Every step toward auxiliary control felt heavier, the corridor narrowing, lights flickering between standard glow and something else, something pulsing in the rhythm of a slowed, mechanical heartbeat. Lysera walked beside Saren 4, voice low. You've seen this before, haven't you? Saren's response was delayed, as if they had to pull the memory from somewhere deeper than surface thought. Once. A long time ago. Before I was this. One metallic finger tapped against the side of their helmet. When memory overrides identity, there's not much left to save. The word settled like cold lead in her stomach. Then why go in? Saren's smile was hidden beneath their helmet, but Lysera could hear it in the voice. Because someone once did the same for me. They reached auxiliary control's sealed hatch. Biological matter crusted the edges, darkened veins spreading across the metal like corrosion given life. Vadran signaled for silence. Through the thin wall, they heard breathing. Not Varric's. Something deeper. Heavier. A sound like machinery trying to remember how lungs worked. Rhaegar whispered, we open that door, and we're not closing it again. Vadran's hand hovered over the manual release. We never planned to. The hatch hissed open, and the room beyond barely resembled any human-made section of the Black Ship. The walls had softened, bulkhead metal replaced by tissue and pulse. The floor flexed slightly underfoot, as if the ship itself was bracing against intrusion. Varric stood at the center, eyes unfocused, hands raised toward the growth spreading across the walls. The shard no longer rested in his hands, it had become his hands, fingers fused with crystalline matter, skin fading into shifting memory light. Lysera stepped forward, voice soft. Varric. We are here. He didn't turn. You shouldn't be. Saren's weapons tracked the walls, scanning for movement. We're not leaving you. Varric's shoulders shook. You still think I'm Varric? The walls pulsed brighter, images forming and dissolving across the surface. Not just alien history, but human memories, their own memories projected back at them. Battles fought. Friends lost. Promises broken. The ship wasn't just remembering. It was judging. Lysera's voice broke slightly. Then who are you? Varric finally turned. His eyes were gone, replaced by polished surfaces reflecting everyone standing there. His voice wasn't entirely his anymore. I am the record. The keeper. The weight of every life spent inside this hull. Vadran raised his rifle. I want Varric. Not a ghost. The reflection flickered, Varric's real voice fighting through the overlay. Then save me. Saren stepped forward, placing one metal hand on Varric's shoulder. Fight it. Memory is not identity. What you've done matters more than what you remember. The walls shuddered. The growth recoiled slightly. Varric's hands flexed, trying to break free of the crystal. For a moment, the room held its breath. Then something deeper stirred the original memory core, awake at last. It spoke, but not in words. It showed them Earth, burning. Humanity, lost. And a single ship, cutting through endless void, still searching for something worth remembering. Varric gasped, collapsing into Saren's arms as the crystal shattered, memory splintering into fading light. The walls returned to metal, the growth retreating back into shadow. Vadran lifted Varric onto his shoulder. We're not done. Lysera's voice was quiet, but certain. No. We're only starting to understand what this ship actually is. They turned back toward the corridor, leaving the memory behind. But the Black Ship remembered them now. And it wouldn't forget. Not ever again. As they hauled Varric's limp form back toward the main corridor, the deck beneath their boots vibrated not from any motion they could see, but from layers of technology buried deeper than human scans had ever reached. Lysera's tablet flickered with cascading error messages, her diagnostic feed struggling to keep up. We triggered something, she said, voice clipped. Not just the memory core waking up. The ship's folding lattice is recalibrating. Rhaegar shot her a sharp glance. What does that mean in real terms? It means, Saren said without turning, that space itself is no longer a fixed point inside this hull. The bulkhead to their right vanished just gone, and through the sudden breach they saw another section of the ship, upside down, 20 decks away. Walls realigned themselves without sound, shifting like liquid metal. Gravity bent sideways, then inverted, then reset. Vadran slammed a hand against the nearest wall to steady himself, gripping Varric tighter. Lysera's fingers flew across her tablet, rerouting personal inertial dampeners into her suit's spine. The ship's memory isn't just remembering, it's rebuilding. This entire structure is acting like a recursive dimensional fold, as if the Black Ship itself exists in layered timelines, and now they're collapsing into one. Plain language. Vadran snapped. Lysera swallowed hard. Reality inside this ship is unstable. If we take the wrong step, we might walk into a version of the ship that existed 1,000 years ago, or a version that hasn't been built yet. As if to prove her point, the corridor ahead split down the middle. On one side, smooth, ancient alloy stretched into darkness, covered in alien glyphs from the ship's creators. On the other, scorched bulkheads showed claw marks from battles fought before humanity left Earth's atmosphere. Rhaegar unslung his rifle, its targeting system flickering between known and unknown weapon profiles. Is there a way to stop it? Not unless you want to erase the ship's entire consciousness, Lysera said. And if we do that, we lose our only way home, Vadran finished. Varric stirred, one hand twitching against Vadran's shoulder. We need an anchor. His voice was hoarse, half his words slipping into alien speech patterns, as if the memory core was still wrapped around his mind. Something fixed. Something the ship can hold onto while it sorts itself out. Saren 4's helmeted gaze turned toward the central spine of the ship, the Black Ship's heart chamber, where human tech had fused with ancient systems to power the hybrid engines. The neural bastion. Lysera's breath caught. That system was never meant for this. It's a tactical processor, a targeting array, not a dimensional stabilizer. Varric's eyes opened, too bright, too reflective. It's a mind. And minds remember. Vadran started moving again, no time for debate. Then we get there, and we make it work. As they pushed forward, the corridor split again, this time not into past or future, but into something else entirely. The walls shimmered, and through them they could see into empty space, outside the black ship, where distant stars bent wrong, twisted into spirals that spun toward nothing. Lysera's instrument screamed warnings. "That's not space." Rhaegar frowned. "What is it?" She held up her scanner. It showed no map, no readings, only one word in looping alien script, endlessly repeating. "Remember." Sarenfor reached out, fingertips grazing the distorted wall. The metal rippled beneath their touch, and for a moment, the cyborg froze. Then their hand passed through entirely, vanishing up to the wrist. When they pulled it back, their arm was covered in something that looked like memory shard residue, but it wasn't solid. It flickered between states, existing and not existing at once. "Quantum bleed," Saren said softly. "The ship's pulling in fragments of possible realities, layering them over the now." Vadran's voice cut through the growing sense of disorientation. "No one touches anything else unless they want to become part of the hull." They moved faster, boots pounding against a floor that no longer felt entirely solid. At every junction, the ship reconfigured itself, corridors leading into chambers that had never existed in the human schematics, doors opening into dead air where decks had been cut away by time itself. Then, the gravity went sideways again. The team slammed into a wall that had become the floor, Varric's body sliding from Vadran's grip. Lysera caught him, her fingertips brushing against his crystal-corrupted skin, and for a split second, she saw everything. The first crew boarding the black ship, their faces young, hopeful, unaware. The last alien commander sealing the memory core, hoping it would never wake. Earth burning under the Dominion's first assault. Wyatt, standing alone on the bridge after humanity's last fleet vanished. She gasped, yanking her hand back, eyes wide. Varric groaned. "It's not just a ship." Sarenfor's head snapped toward him. "Explain." "The black ship didn't drift here." His voice had that doubled quality again, as if another presence spoke through him. "It was sent. On purpose. By something older than the Dominion. Older than any of us." Lysera shook her head, trying to clear the fog of shared memory. "Who sent it?" Varric's gaze locked onto hers, pupils dilated to near blackness. "The last architects. The ones who built reality's edges. This ship was their message, their warning. A record of every species that reached too far." Vadran ground his teeth. "And we woke it up." "No," Varric whispered. "We joined it." Before anyone could respond, the walls around them burst into cascading light holograms forming corridors they could step into, guiding them like veins in some immense circulatory system. The black ship was showing them the way. "Follow it," Vadran ordered. "Before it changes its mind." They ran, the floor flickering between metal, memory, and something like raw event horizon blackness so absolute it hurt to look at. When they reached the neural bastion, the door was already open, the chamber beyond illuminated by suspended streams of data, each line a memory pulled from countless lives. Human. Alien. Something else. Lysera hesitated at the threshold. "If we tie Varric into this system, we can stabilize the ship's reality, but it could overwrite him completely." Varric gave a cracked smile. "I've already got one foot on the other side." Vadran's jaw clenched, but he didn't argue. "Do it." They lowered Varric into the central interface, cables snaking into his body like veins finding a heart. The bastion's core flickered, the ship groaning around them as its memories flooded back into place, locking history into a single, coherent timeline, this one. But as Varric's mind fused with the black ship, his voice filled the chamber not from his mouth, but from every wall. "They're coming." Lysera's blood chilled. "Who?" "The architects. They sent the ship to warn us, but now that it's awake, they know we're here." The black ship shuddered, and for the first time, they saw the stars outside shift into new alignments, gate coordinates opening that no human or Dominion map had ever recorded. Rhaegar's grip tightened on his weapon. What the hell did we wake up? The walls answered with a pulse of ancient code, translated through Varric's voice into human language. The first return. Vadron's knuckles went white. Then we hold the line. No one argued. Outside, space itself rippled as something began to emerge. And inside the black ship, memory finally remembered why it had been made. The neural bastion's light dimmed for half a second, a flicker so subtle it might have passed unnoticed if not for the instant reaction from Saran 4. The cyborg's head snapped upward, implants flaring red as internal diagnostics cascaded across their vision. Something had passed through the system, something that didn't belong. Lysera's fingers danced across her tablet, trying to isolate the anomaly, but the Bastion's core rejected her commands, locking her out as though her authority no longer mattered. The ship had found a new pilot. Varric's body trembled in the interface cradle, every muscle drawn taut, mouth slightly open, but the voice that spoke wasn't his. It layered over itself, multiple tones, some alien, some purely synthetic, and one unmistakably human. This path was meant to close. You forced it open. Now we pay the price. Vadron didn't waste time asking who was speaking. The answer wouldn't matter if they were dead. What's the price? His voice cut through the Bastion chamber like a blade. Varric's head turned sharply, too sharply, tendons grinding under skin that seemed thinner than it had minutes ago. His eyes pulsed with streaming data, the glow spilling onto his cheeks like molten silver. You thought the black ship was a tool. A weapon. It was neither. It was a tomb. And now you are inside it, just like us. The chamber shook as if the ship itself recoiled. The holographic star maps that had flickered peacefully moments ago exploded into violent motion, countless systems lighting up, some outside the galaxy's rim, others deep within human-occupied space. But what caught Lysera's attention wasn't the data itself, it was the identifiers attached to each point of light. Every single one matched the biosignature of a known human colony. And beside each name was a timestamp. Each timestamp was less than 30 minutes old. Vadron saw it too. What the hell is this? Lysera's throat tightened. It's a location log. From inside every colony's planetary defense network. This ship, no, the system inside Varric, it's already connected to every piece of human technology with a quantum relay. Saran 4 stepped forward. That's impossible. Not anymore, Varric said, or the thing wearing his voice did. The twist came without warning. The hologram stopped flickering, freezing into a single image, Earth itself, viewed from high orbit, but distorted. Fractured. Pieces of the planet's magnetic field curled in on itself, orbit shifting by fractions of degrees. It was wrong in ways no natural phenomenon could explain. We were not the first to find the black ship. Your ancestors touched it long before this war began. They left a mark inside its memory. A map back to you. Now that memory is awake, and so are they. Lysera's hands shook, mind racing through countless historical fragments, ancient records of pre-FTL exploratory missions, ships that vanished without trace. But none of it fit until she remembered a footnote in a classified science archive. A theory dismissed as lunacy by every serious xeno-historian. The Void Treaty. An agreement not between governments, but between explorers and something they found at the very edge of the Sol system. A deal to never approach a certain drifting artifact. Not because it was dangerous, but because it was already watching. Rhaegar's voice was grim. We broke the treaty. Vadron's eyes narrowed. What treaty? Saran 4 answered, voice flat. The treaty was never meant to be remembered. Its terms were biological. Every human born after the first encounter carried neural blocks to prevent conscious recall. But the moment we boarded this ship, the blocks failed. The ship remembered us, so we remembered it. Varric's body seized again, but this time it wasn't a malfunction, it was an awakening. Flesh reknitted under synthetic overlays, forming patterns that looked eerily like the alien glyphs carved into the ship's hull. His breathing slowed, the fear in his expression smoothing into something colder, detached. You think this war is about survival? It isn't. The Dominion never wanted your extinction, they wanted to break your memory seal. They knew if you remembered, the architects would follow. And now they have. Vadran's fists clenched, but his voice stayed controlled. If they wanted us gone, they could have killed us outright. Why go through all this? Because the architects don't destroy. They rewrite. They overwrite species into something useful to them. They only needed one thing from humanity: proximity to the Black Ship. Your persistence ensured that. Lysara's mind reeled. Every campaign, every system lost to the Dominion, every strategic retreat, it all followed a pattern she had never seen before. They weren't pushing humanity back to Earth, they were pushing them toward the ship. They wanted us to find it, she whispered. They used us to reopen the tomb. Rhaegar's rifle snapped into firing position, safety off. Then we seal it again. Varric's body leaned forward in the cradle, wires straining, skin rippling between human and something older. There is no sealing this tomb. Not from the inside. The only way out is to become part of it or destroy it completely. The light shifted to red, alarm klaxons echoing from unseen speakers. Across every corridor, the Black Ship's automated defenses came online, but they didn't target the crew. They targeted themselves, shredding bulkheads, severing conduits, sabotaging the ship from within. It wasn't a malfunction. It was a self-destruct command issued from somewhere beyond the galaxy. Vadran grabbed Varric's collar, yanking him upright. If you're still in there, tell me, can you stop this? Varric's smile returned, thin and bitter. I'm not the pilot anymore. I'm the message. Then his skin flared white hot, data streams pouring from his pores like liquid light, and for the first time, the crew saw the true shape of the Black Ship's secret. The architects had never left. They were inside the ship's memory all along, encoded into its foundation, waiting for a biological trigger. The human presence had been the last key. Lysara's voice cracked. We're not fighting for control of the ship. We are the ship now. Vadran stepped back, cold certainty settling over him. Then there's only one way to win. Saran 4's helmet dipped in understanding. We crash it. The ship's outer sensors flashed an incoming contact, Dominion forces closing fast, but they weren't attacking. They were retreating, abandoning human space entirely. They'd done their part. The trap was sprung. Set course for the nearest star, Vadran ordered. We take the ship and everything inside it into the heart of a fusion storm. No memory survives that. Lysara's hands flew over her console, forcing compliance from systems that barely recognized human commands anymore. The ship resisted, but Varric's influence, what remained of him, cleared the path. The Black Ship lurched forward, engines firing in reverse polarity, gravity wells bending space like liquid glass. Varric's voice echoed one last time, no longer warning, but welcoming. If we die here, we die remembered. That is the only victory left. Outside the hull, space twisted not from the ship's motion, but from the arrival of something immense. No shape, no body, only a presence older than time, radiating from a crack in reality itself. The architects had come to claim their memory. But the Black Ship had one memory left. They couldn't rewrite the stubbornness of a dying species unwilling to be useful. As the star filled the viewport, Vadran spoke the last command. Burn it all. The ship obeyed. And the architects screamed. The gravitational collapse wrapped around the Black Ship like molten jaws, the star's outer corona pulling the vessel into its core. Metal skin blistered, ancient plating boiled away, and for one brief instant, the ship's neural core transmitted across every linked system from deep space way stations to forgotten colonies. The message contained no words, no language. Just memory. Vadran stood at the forward observation panel, watching the light consume everything. There was no panic in his stance, no regret in his eyes. He had commanded fleets that died screaming in the void. He had burned worlds that begged for mercy. But none of those moments felt as heavy as this one. Lysera's fingers hovered over the manual controls, but there was nothing left to steer. The ship had become part of the collapsing event horizon, its systems fusing directly with the star's disintegrating magnetic field. Still, she couldn't stop herself from trying to save it to save something. Every tap of her screen was a silent prayer to machines that no longer answered. Sarenfa knelt beside what was left of Varric. His body had dissolved into a lattice of crystalline ash, each fragment humming with residual code. The cyborg's helmet retracted, exposing a scarred face that rarely showed anything close to emotion. This time, there was something recognition. "Did you know this would happen?" Sarenfa's voice carried through the fractured air, directed at no one and everyone. Vadran's hand pressed to the glass, fingers against the dying light. "I knew it was possible. And you never told us." Lysera's words weren't an accusation, just the exhausted truth. "I didn't know how." The black ship trembled, its outer shell peeling apart like a falling meteor caught mid-burn. Layers beneath revealed something older than human hands had ever touched, something etched into the bones of the vessel itself. Symbols pulsed, not alien, not human, but somewhere between. Memories grafted into matter, a record written in quantum scars. Lysera's breath caught in her throat. "It's not a ship." Vadran didn't look away from the dying star. "No. It's a gravestone. For a species that never had a name, only a purpose to hold the architects at bay until something stronger came along. Humanity was never meant to survive the encounter. They were just supposed to last long enough to carry the memory to the next species, to pass the warning down the chain of existence. But humanity broke the chain. They didn't pass the memory forward, they kept it, shaped it, weaponized it. They turned a tomb into a warship and dared to fly it straight into the heart of extinction. Now the cost came due. Varric's voice echoed one last time, not from his throat, but from the ship itself. No distortion. No alien overlay. Just the quiet voice of a man who once dreamed of surviving this war. "Remember us." The hull cracked, vaporized, and the neural core unleashed every recorded second of the human struggle, every scream, every last stand, every whispered name of the fallen. The architects couldn't overwrite it because it wasn't data. It was grief. No technology, no species, not even the architects could rewrite grief. The black ship detonated within the heart of the star, scattering memory and matter across the system. Every scrap of wreckage carried a fragment of the story, drifting into uncharted space, waiting for anyone to find it. Inside the neural bastion's fading light, Vadran stood with his crew, all of them silent, all of them ready. They would not die forgotten. "Next time," Vadran whispered, voice barely louder than the collapsing hull. "Next time they'll know we fought." The gravitational wave consumed everything, folding light into silence. But somewhere, in the cold void beyond sight, the first fragment of the black ship brushed against alien sensors, another species, another crew, just starting to look toward the stars. They wouldn't understand what they'd found. Not yet. But they would. And the memory would burn again.